Many of you have no doubt probably seen, especially really over like the sort of the past, what maybe like 2 weeks or so, you've been seeing a sort of post shared around of what were meant to be the four assumptions, especially behind Brexit. And especially these were the big four key things that were sent to and really pushed at that time behind the hard Brexiteers, because I know as it may be a sort of bizarre thing to really talk about, but prior to like the end of 2015 and of course 2016 obviously being the big one, no one ever talked about the EU at all, good or bad. And I still say today that ministers and MPs should have talked about the good that the EU was doing to their communities and their constituencies. And I think, again, 2016 would have been entirely different if a lot of towns had realized the extent to which the EU actually went and helped their town, especially a lot of these left behind areas that ended up voting for Brexit. But these four key assumptions, first of all, what were they? Well, the first of one was that it would cause the EU to collapse. Two, we'd get the benefits of being in the single market without having to follow the rules, that we'd get a really good trade deal from the US, and of course, that there would be a perfectly painless solution to the Northern Ireland problem. Like, those were the four assumptions built on Brexit. These were the four key things pushed really, really hard by, at the time, those Brexit fanatics. Because, again, Brexit and, of course, the UK leaving the European Union, again, prior to like the end of 2015, 2016, was a fringe issue. No one cared about it. It was made an issue predominantly by the time by especially Nigel Farage, pushing heavily at the time, the Syrian refugee crisis, and picturing it basically as being the EU's fault, that somehow these Syrian refugees are going to come to Germany, spend the necessary time of something like 8 years, I think it is, to gain German citizenship, and then they're going to come to the UK. And of course, as we've said before, the issue when it comes to about immigration and being Brexit, nothing to do with it. There were rules that the Tories, if they wanted to, could have enforced them. They just chose not to do it. And the thing is that Nigel Farage and UKIP made immigration a bigger deal than it actually really even was in this country, because immigration doesn't really cause a lot of problems in this country. It does not cause a lot of problems. It does not reduce wages. It has not added to the housing crisis as much as a lot of people like to say it has. Has not added to the jobs crisis. Again, like I say, most of the assumptions made about immigration are absolutely wrong. The problem is having actual good information to fight against it. And of course, we were up against basically a right-wing media assault where this was being pumped out on a continuingly daily basis. And it's so funny now to see so many right-wing newspapers saying about how we have to take these, Afghanistan refugees, but literally for like the past, 5 or 6 years, these newspapers have been railing against refugees, saying how Britain is full and we shouldn't take a single one. So trust me, this massive U-turn on immigration is not lost on a lot of people over here. I can tell you that. But back to these four assumptions, because this was what Brexit was built on, and this was what the hardcore of hardcore Brexiteers really built their feelings around. And again, like I say, none of these assumptions have actually happened. None of them have come true. So today we're going to go to this guy here, Nick Tyrone, who does an absolutely really good breakdown of what these four assumptions were and essentially why they all failed and why they were so popular at the time. So before we do jump into that, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for those people who do support the channel that way. So, the 4 assumptions behind Brexit explained. Yesterday, I put out the following tweet. Brexit was based on 4 assumptions. That 1, it would cause the EU to collapse. 2, we'd get all the benefits of the single market without having to follow the rules. And 3, we'd get a great trade deal from the US. 4, there would be a painless solution to the Northern Ireland problem. And of course, none of those happened. A reaction from a lot of Brexiteers to this tweet had been, that's not why I voted for Brexit. Another reaction goes further than this. No one thought Brexit would bring these 4 things to fruition. What are you talking about? To be clear, I never meant to infer that your average Leave voter in Bolton or Clacton or anywhere in Britain really thought of those 4 things when they went to the ballot box in June of 2016. What I mean was, those 4 assumptions underpinned the actual intellectual project that was leaving the European Union. Back when even no one really cared much about such a thing happening, nor pre-2015, apart from a very committed band of Brexiteers. For indeed, I can recall a time when talking about the UK's relationship with the European Union was at best a minority interest, something only for the super nerds to actually get involved with. I organised panel events at the Labour and Tory conferences on the very subject, inviting both hardcore Leavers and Remainers, and there was almost always very underwhelmed about the level of interest. For Remainers, i.e. most people at the time, you either didn't really care whether we were in or out. You might have preferred to stay in, as was the status quo, but you actually really didn't spend any time talking about it. Or even if you thought about being a member of the EU was really important, but you didn't take the idea seriously, though they would actually ever leave. And of course, if you were a leaver, you were either the sort that wanted to leave but didn't care much about it, or you really did want to leave the European Union but figured it would never actually happen. That is, unless you were part, of course, of the hardcore Leave set, i.e. Nigel Farage and his UKIP followers, or part of the Eurosceptic cult within the Conservative Party. These people had a plan, and they were sure that we would leave the EU sooner than everyone thought. Back then, these people talked in practical, scientific terms about leaving the EU. All the slogans came later. In the run-up to the referendum itself, they didn't even talk about immigration much at the time as well. What they did talk what they did talk a lot about, of course, was the EU's imminent collapse in the face of Brexit. This was perhaps the most vital assumption made by the band of Brexiteers who fought to make Brexit a reality. The bloc was not destined to last and just needed a single catalyst to break it apart. Brexit would be perfect. Once the UK voted to leave the EU, tensions between France and Germany, East and West Europe, North and South Europe as well, would become unbearable. In negotiating a post-Brexit relationship with the UK, the EU would never hold together, and Brexit would start an exodus of nations fleeing the EU, with which the UK would be at the centre of a new trading vanguard. In addition to the EU stuff I hosted between 2010 and 2016, I attended a lot of Eurosceptic events as well. The notion that Brexit would kill the EU off was perhaps the biggest idea that was tossed about, and I can certainly understand why. It remains crucial to Brexit's ultimate success or failure as a project. For the UK to be outside of a trading bloc that is literally 22 miles away from another, for that trading bloc to continue to function and indeed grow more commercially powerful would indeed be deeply silly. They all knew this, and that is why the Brexit will kill the EU remains to this day so central to the whole thing, at least in spirit. And it's important enough for the Daily Express to run several articles a week on this subject to this very day. And again, they just did that very recently. about a situation. And again, of course, it's not going to happen because, again, you can pretty much set your watch by the fact of the Daily Express printing an article saying the EU is about to implode. Like I say, they do it literally on a weekly basis. And again, I'm not saying the people in Burnley voted for Brexit in 2016 because they were convinced that it would destroy the EU. They almost certainly had all sorts of reasons for voting to leave. What I am saying is those who directly fought to make the referendum happen, and by extension for Brexit to happen, were very powerful and powered greatly by this idea. And as I've said before, you've got to split people up into two different factions. Like I say, what this guy's talking about is what I would call the Brexiteers. So again, this is like Nigel Farage, the people in the ERG, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Mark Francois, Daniel Hannan. Those are the Brexiteers. That's who he is talking about, who were, these four core ideas were expressly what were driving them. And of course, then you have Brexit supporters. These were the people, as he said, the people in Burnley who voted for Brexit in 2016. They are entirely two separate groups, which is why I always make the distinction of when I am talking about a Brexiteer, I mean that group. And when I'm talking about Brexit supporters, I explicitly say Brexit supporters being, again, people who voted for Brexit just in 2016. So, back, of course, to the original Brexiteer concept of Brexit. Once the EU started to fracture, the UK would then pick off trade deals with its former member states themselves. This would add pressure to the crumbling of the EU, causing it to further fracture. The single market would have to change to adjust to this new Brexit reality. As a result, the UK would then get all the benefits of being in the single market without ever having any of the perceived downsides, such as the freedom of movement. Once outside the grip of the EU, the UK could then fulfill its manifest destiny to get a trade deal with the US like no other in the history of America as a trading nation, as the benefits would blow. That doesn't make any sense. Its benefits would bring part of the single market. Blow being in the part of the single market out of the water. Sorry, that was me there. And it would also lead to other trade deals in the UK's interest, as the UK-US nexus became the new centre of the Western world. And finally, in the face of all this, the EU would be in no position to make any demands in terms of how Northern Ireland deal was actually dealt with. The UK would really indeed hold all the cards here. Of course, none of these things happened in the wake of Brexit. The EU stayed united throughout the negotiating process, forcing Boris Johnson in the end to settle on very poor set of terms for the Northern Ireland, and is separated from Great Britain via customs border. This is indeed a great deal of trade friction between the UK and the EU, and there is still no US trade deal anywhere in sight. And because of that, those who were at the centre pushing for Britain to leave the EU from about 2005 to 2015 will run a mile from any assertion that these assumptions were made at the heart of their project at the time. Why would they? They were under absolutely no pressure to admit that any of this would actually happen once we were voted to leave the EU, since none of it actually came to be true. They are at liberty to even change the story. But that was all I heard. That was all I heard continuously. These assumptions don't even have to do anything with the Brexit project any longer, because they don't even ultimately take place as they predicted. But these were at the core and the idea of behind leaving in the first place, to those who cared about it when no one else did, and without which Brexit would have indeed never have happened. And I absolutely agree with these, because if you look, and again, you go back and you look at the assumptions of leaving the EU back in, between 2005 and 2015, those four key assumptions were at the very core. The idea that as soon as we did Brexit, the EU would fracture, and this would put Britain in a great place to, again, grab all the benefits of the single market without any of the perceived downsides. We would then be able to attain what was called the Atlantic Bridge. If people remember back that far, when that was talked about that being the trade deal, the Atlantic Bridge between the UK and the US. And of course, eventually, this would pretty much leave us with a free hand to do whatever we wanted in Northern Ireland. And now, as you can see, even today, those were the key four assumptions of Brexit. What drove the Brexiteers to get the referendum done? What drove them to push for, again, leaving the EU? And if you think about it, even back then, back when the ERG was destroying the Chequers Agreement, that was specifically done because they did not think that there was enough pressure being put on Europe to give us the deal that they want so that they could, of course, cause the EU to fracture, hence why they were pushing for such a hard deal. And even now, after Boris Johnson did that very thing of being hard and threatening a no-deal walkout, that breakup didn't happen. And now, when we have a massive trade bloc, literally 22 miles away, which is flourishing, growing more and more economically powerful, it just makes Brexit and the UK leaving that even more silly. So as time just goes on, as we've said from the very beginning, the path for us back to rejoining the EU was set pretty much from day one. It's not a matter of if, it is just a matter of when. And to be honest, it will, I think, eventually come down to a massive civil war that is going to take place within the Tory party between a lot more of the economic moderates who understand that they want regulations being in the market and governing the market versus those who are completely free market libertarian fundamentalists who do not want any type of regulation whatsoever. And of course, those are the big hardcore Brexiteers. So will this happen? Who knows? Well, again, as always, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But as always, as they say, politics is indeed a very interesting beast and animal. So as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next.